So the first thing we want to get into is midpoint itself. Midpoint is a point that divides a segment perfectly into two congruent parts. The formula for midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So you take the average of the x's, and that's the x value of your midpoint. Y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So you take the averages of the y's, and that gives you the y value of your midpoint. And that's it. Just follow that step for both sides, and it gives you the midpoint, the point that is exactly in the middle of whatever segment you're looking for. So we have these two examples here. And with these two examples, we're going to be applying this formula exactly how it's presented. So we want to find the midpoint between 5, negative 2, 13, 22. So for the x side of it, 5 plus 13 over 2. And for the y side of it, negative 2 plus 22 over 2. 5 plus 13 is 18 over 2. Negative 2 plus 22 is 20 over 2, which gives us our final answer of 9, 10 as our midpoint. And then for the second one, it is rinse and repeat. So 6 plus 19 over 2, and negative 5 plus 17 over 2. Well, 6 plus 19, that's going to be 25 over 2. Negative 7 plus 17 is going to be 12 over 2, which gives us 12.5 and 6 as our midpoint. So the midpoint of segment VU is at the origin. So if we have this graph, the midpoint is right there at the origin. If V is in quadrant 4, so let's remember our quadrants. Quadrant 1 is where everything is positive, so positive, positive. Quadrant 2 is where your x's become negative, but you're still positive. Quadrant 3 is where everything is negative. And quadrant 4 is where your x is positive, but your y values are negative. So that's the order. So V is in quadrant 4, and this is my midpoint. The question is, where is quadrant U? Well, segments can only go in one direction. So if this is part of my segment from my midpoint to my endpoint, the other part of the segment must go in the same direction. So it has to be in quadrant U, or quadrant 2. So the midpoint of QP is M being at negative 1, 3. If the coordinate of Q is at 4, 9, what is the coordinate of P? So like with all the questions, we don't have a diagram, so we need to draw one. We know we're dealing with midpoints, so that means that this must be a line or a segment. So the best thing we can do is start by drawing out a segment. And so on this segment, it doesn't matter how it looks, it doesn't have to go a certain direction or anything. The goal is just to get something that you can work with. So on this segment, we know that we have a midpoint that's at negative 1, 3, and we have an endpoint that's at 4, 9. And so the question is, what's P? We don't know its x, and we don't know its y. So to solve this question, let's first think about driving. If you're trying to go from where you're at to the city, let's say somewhere in between where you're at and the city is a gas station. And the gas station is directly in the middle, perfectly situated in the middle. If it takes you 10 miles to get to that gas station, and it's right in the middle, how many miles does it take to get from that gas station to the city? Well, it's going to take 10 as well, because the gas station's in the middle. Whatever you do to get to the middle is what you do to get to the end. And so that applies to segments as well. Whatever you do to get to the middle you do again to get to the end. So how do you go from 4 to -1? You subtract 5. So then I'm going to do that again to get to the end. So -1 minus 5. And what that gives me is an x value of -6. Then we're going to apply that as well to the y values. How do you go from 9 to 3? You have to subtract 6. So then I'm going to do that again to get to the end. Well, what's 3 minus 6? That's -3. So the value of p, the coordinate of p, is at -6, -3. Points N, 18, 2, P at -14, -12, and Q, which is unknown, are all collinear. And again, collinear means that they are on the same line together. One of the points, so we don't know which one, we have 3 options. One of the points is the midpoint of the segment that is formed by the other 2 points. So 3 points, one of them is unknown, and one of those points, either N, P, or Q, is the midpoint, and the other 2 points are the end points. So what are the possible points for Q? So because of this scenario, because either one of them could possibly be the midpoint, Q then technically has 3 possible locations that it could be at. So option 1, we can say that N and P, so N at 18, 2, and P at -14, -12. Yes, I know this line's backwards. We're just drawing the diagram, just trying to get some headspace here. So we can say that N and P are the endpoints, and that Q is the midpoint. If that's the first scenario, then we can simply just do the midpoint formula. And we'll do 18 plus -14 over 2, 2 plus -12 over 2, and then simplify that out. And we would get 2, -5 as our first possible location for Q. Option number 2, we can say that this line still starts with N at 18, 2, but it ends with Q, and P is our midpoint. If that's the case, then we need to do what we did in a previous problem and look to see how we change as we go from one point to the next. So to go from 18 to -14, we would end up subtracting 32. And to go from 2 to -12, we would end up subtracting -14. So then if we're going to continue that trend, because midpoints are in the middle, what you do to get to the midpoint, you do to get to the end. From our x side of things, we would subtract 32 again. So -14 minus 32 will be -46. And from the y side of things, we would subtract 14 again. And so -12 minus 14 would be -26. So option number 3 gives us -46, -26, or option number 2, as the other possibility for Q. And so then lastly, option 3, Q, instead of being at the end, is going to start our line. So then that makes N in the middle, and that makes P our other endpoint. And if that's the case, we just end up doing the same thing. So -14 to 18 would be plus 32. And negative 12 to 2 would be plus 14. And so if we continue that, 18 plus 32 would be 50. And 2 plus 14 would give us 16. So the third and final possibility of where Q could be would be 50, 16. So these are the three possible options. Q's in the middle, Q's at the end on the right, or Q's at the beginning on the left. No matter where you put it though, N and P still follow the same order. N, because of how I started the first option, N was first, P was second, and that still follows all the way through. If you started with P and then ended with N on the first one, you would keep that pattern going through as well. But this is how you solve this problem. These are how the three possibilities for where Q is at, either in the middle, at the end, or at the front, and then you just do the midpoint formula, or you look at the pattern and continue the pattern to get from one side to the other.